Lots of people signing on right now, so just again letting them get settled, and I think we'll just get going. I do want to officially welcome you to our second webinar on our Bite-Sized Asset Management Sustainability for Water Infrastructure webinar series. We've started this webinar series as we transition our previously annual in-person asset management workshop to an every other year event. Please do be on the lookout for a save the date email. It should be coming early next year for our 2026 workshop, so that will be that in-person date that we have done in the past. The first webinar that we offered in this series covered level of service, and today we're going to focus on financial planning. We also would love input from our audience as far as topics that are of interest to you, so be on the lookout for some follow-up after this webinar. Also note, if you have requested to receive a certificate for your training contact hours, you will receive them within approximately 2 weeks after the webinar via an email. We do anticipate holding other webinars on different topics, so we'll maintain a recording library that people can access, and feel free to reach out to us with questions or any more information that you'd like to know. So again, our topic today is financial planning for water and wastewater systems, so you're in the right place if that's what you're here to hear about. And I will turn it to Andrea.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrea Betlick. I am the watershed specialist in the non-point source management program in the watershed assistance section of the Watershed Management Bureau. I provide technical assistance to project managers and grantees receiving funding through the Section 604B and Section 319 of the Clean Water Act to address stormwater impacts to watersheds throughout the state. I will be providing technical assistance today. We're just going to go over a few housekeeping items before we start. There will be time at the end for questions, so please feel free to put any of those questions in the chat, but please remain muted at all times during the webinar itself until we hit that Q&A session. The presentation will be recorded and posted on the asset management webpage, which is linked below. And I will put a bunch of links in the chat box as we go along, just so that we can copy and paste those as you want them. And then again, as Sarah said, the certificates will be for 1 hour, from 1 technical credit hour for drinking water and wastewater operators, and they will be emailed post-webinar. If you didn't sign up for those and you do want one now that you have already signed up but you didn't select those, please email Sarah. And that is all I have, so I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Andrea. For those that don't know me, I am Sarah Ridyard, and I'm the Sustainability Engineer for the Wastewater Engineering Bureau for New Hampshire DES. And I manage a grant program for asset management projects that cover clean water, which includes wastewater and stormwater, with a lot of support from Deb Loisel on stormwater. And I also support and manage wastewater planning projects that are funded by New Hampshire DES through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. I'm always happy to help if you have questions about applying to our funding programs or about currently funded projects. You can find my contact info on this slide. There's my email address and my phone number. And I'm really glad to be here today to provide you this webinar. We are going to give just some brief updates from our staff here before we get into our topic. So I will start with our clean water updates. And as a reminder, this webinar series is a collaboration of different speakers and different topics, and we have staff here from wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater at DES, and we each just want to give a little update about our programs at the current time. Please note that if you are watching a recording of this webinar, some of the information may be outdated at the time you see this, so feel free to reach out with questions. For Clean Water State Revolving Fund, I do want to just remind people that the loan applications for projects offered funding in 2025 are due May 1st of 2026. And note that this is an earlier deadline than in years past for the loan application. Final applications for asset management projects for clean water, again, wastewater and stormwater, offered funding in 2025 are also due May 1st. And that is a separate application from the loan application. I do want to also mention an exciting update for our Clean Water Asset Management Grant Program. Starting next year, we plan to offer a new kind of support to wastewater and stormwater systems. Through a contract with an engineering firm, we will be able to offer direct support to communities that are interested in growing their asset management program for wastewater or stormwater. It will be at no cost to the community and hopefully will alleviate some of the administrative burden for individual loans and grants. In addition, we plan to offer the support to communities that have received assistance in the past who are looking to update or improve their asset management program, as well as communities that have never received funding from us before. We'll have some more details coming about applying for that in the spring. It's going to follow the same timeline as the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, so with the pre-applications due in the spring. And I also do want to mention we are still providing support for cybersecurity for drinking water and wastewater systems throughout the state through a contract with the Overwatch Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization. And the support on cybersecurity varies depending on the needs of the system, but it can include hardware and software and training for staff. If you have questions or are interested in receiving no-cost support for cybersecurity for your water or wastewater system, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with Overwatch. We do have a lot of other things going on in our bureau as well, but these are just a few of the items I wanted to highlight at this time. I am going to turn it over to Jana for a drinking water update next.
Good morning, everybody. You're stuck with me. My name is Jana McKenna. I manage the drinking water sustainability section in the Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau. And Katie and Matt are both new parents, so they couldn't be with us today. Katie, as recent as just on Wednesday, had her first baby boy, Liam. And Matt will be back next week, and Katie will be back at the end of March. So those two are the folks to reach out to on the drinking water side for your sustainability needs. I also wanted to mention we have a new Michelle Higman just started in the sustainability section. She is going to be doing grants and loans related to lead service lines. So Michelle has been with the Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau, but she's now moved into our section and helping with lead for anybody here that is working on lead service lines. If you have any questions while either Matt or Katie are out, so Michelle, you can reach out, or the general sustainability email at the bottom, or certainly reach out to myself at any time. Thank you. Christina?
Hi, everybody. I'm Christina Rambo. I'm a Resilience and Adaptation Manager here at DES. And I want to start with thanking attendees of our energy workshops in October and November. They were a great success with over 100 attendees. And I just want to remind everybody that whether you've had an energy audit a few years ago, you don't know how to begin implementation of energy measures, or if you don't know if your wastewater or drinking water facility has had an energy evaluation, please reach out to me at the WIEP email below at des.nh.gov. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have and send you past audits if you've had one at your facility. And I also want to remind you that please don't miss out on potential incentives for New Hampshire Saves. So contact your utility before you have system upgrades. And every day you don't implement cost-saving measures for energy efficiency is like money flying away. So save those funds for other needed items and implement those energy audit measures today. Thank you. Over to Sharon.
Hello, everyone. This is Jaren Tasneem. I am the financial analyst for the Wastewater Engineering Bureaus. For the past 2 years, I have been helping the New Hampshire municipalities and towns with providing financial analysis and rate study knowledges and tools. So if you have any question regarding the subject, don't hesitate to contact me in the email address in the screen. And we at NHDES try to come up with new resources and updates. So keep an eye out for that. And on the screen, you'd see the link for the webinar we had on rates last year. One important thing I wanted to mention is SRF, Clean Water SRF is available for rate study under the planning section. So that might be helpful. So yeah. So
Thanks,
that's
Sharon.
all from me.
Great. So I do want to start the discussion about our topic today and give a little introduction. On this slide, I'm showing some headlines for the past several years around the state, and I promise I'm not trying to single out any community by showing these. I know some of the people at these communities are in attendance today, but these were just a few of the many that came up when I did a quick search. So throughout the state, there is definitely public interest in the costs associated with both our drinking water and our wastewater systems. And I think from working in this industry, we all know that there's a challenge to being able to effectively gain public support for the needed infrastructure updates. And anytime the rates are increased, there can be contention and a lack of political will to do so. So these challenges around funding and financing upgrades, and sometimes even just maintaining the infrastructure we have, can be great. And all of these challenges are really compounded by the fact that we have some significant needs in our state. So these numbers I'm showing on this slide are the needed investment that we've identified through our Clean Watershed Needs Survey and the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment. And these are from 2022. So $4.29 billion for wastewater, stormwater, and non-point source, and then $2.46 billion for drinking water, again, just for New Hampshire's needs. And, we only expect these to increase. We are embarking on our new surveys over the next year or so. So expect these numbers to be updated following that. But again, significant costs and significant public interest in these values. I do want to say it's not all doom and gloom around finances. We do have some positive things from the last several years, and we know a lot of communities are putting in the work to make sure that their water and wastewater systems continue to be able to provide excellent 24/7 service and make needed investments. Many towns are working with us to be proactive on updates to their financial plans, and we appreciate all the hard work that's being done. NHDES supports the work that these communities do through funding programs as well as technical assistance. We provide support for asset management for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater, which helps communities to develop risk-based replacement schedules for infrastructure and to proactively tackle challenges for their system's needs. We provide low-interest loans and other financial incentives to help communities access funds needed for infrastructure at the lowest cost available. And we have been fortunate to have seen significant federal funds put into projects in our state over the last several years. We do want to continue to provide training and technical support to communities as well. Through this webinar series, we hope to tackle this topic and continue with some more deep dives into some of the nuts and bolts of setting rates and fees and planning for the future to make sure that the water systems in our state are financially sustainable. And with that, I do want to introduce our speaker, Dave Fox from Raftelis. Raftelis is a government and utility consulting firm that provides support to communities around the country and has particular expertise in the water and wastewater field on financial and rate consulting. And Dave's background is that he has over 15 years of experience in water and wastewater utility and financial and rate consulting, and he has worked with water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities on a variety of financial and rate studies, and he leads the New England office based in Natick, Mass. And with that, I will turn it to Dave.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I want to thank DES for putting on this workshop and for having me here to speak. I'm going to share my screen in just a second and turn my camera off just to make sure I have enough bandwidth. Yeah, financial planning is incredibly important. I think it's why most people are on this call today, except for maybe if you just need credits at the end of the year. Welcome. Hopefully I don't put you all to sleep. All the operational and capital planning is incredibly important, but it means absolutely nothing at the end of the day if you can't have the funding to be able to do the work that you need to do for your communities and for your utility systems. It's really where the rubber meets the road. So what I want to talk about today is just financial planning projects typically take a few months. I'm going to try to distill that down in about an hour or so, maybe a little less than an hour. I'm going to get into as much detail as I can, really just trying to outline at a high level, walking through a financial planning process, really relevant for all utilities, more with a water and wastewater focus here. Obviously, try to give you enough information that you can start going out and maybe pulling some of these data together that you need for financial planning, or at least maybe changing your framework for, how you're thinking about budgeting and planning for the future for your utilities. So, you have sustainable and good, clean, safe, reliable service today and for years to come. So with that being said, I'm going to turn my camera off, share my screen, and walk you through presentations, and then hopefully leave plenty of time for Q&A at the tail end of this. But thanks again for being here. Somebody just say yes that they can see this before I start rambling.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, let's keep moving. So why are we here? Why are we even talking about financial planning, talking about rate sustainability? This is going to come, as no surprise to anybody here on this call. Utilities are dealing with a lot, and a lot recently in terms of inflation. It's not just hitting us in our wallets and pocketbooks and bank accounts at home. It's very much hitting water and wastewater utilities as well, both on the operation and the capital cost side. With really, no end in sight. Costs continue to increase. Some, in recent years, some electricity costs or capital-related costs, chemical-related costs going up meaningfully and putting a significant cost driver or a cost pressure on utilities. Not only in New Hampshire, just across the country. You're not alone in that boat with regard to costs continuing to increase. Those inflationary impacts are even exacerbated by just the need to renew and replace aging infrastructure, especially in New England, where we have, old aging systems that need to be renewed and replaced to, again, continue to provide that good, clean, safe, reliable service to residents 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. There's a lot of costs, a lot of money that needs to go into doing that. On top of that, communities dealing with PFAS and other regulations, other contaminants, and the staggering costs associated with that. And if that wasn't an uphill battle enough, we've been seeing across the country for years now just declines in per capita consumption. And for those utilities out there that bill almost entirely or predominantly based on water consumption and the amount that customers are using, as they're using less over time, your revenue base is declining accordingly without any rate increases to support that. So uphill battle with regard to costs continuing to increase annually. And then your revenue base is declining because of declines in per capita consumption. Now, at some point, we'd probably like to think we'd see some sort of plateauing of that reduction in per capita consumption. I think that the primary driver, in my opinion at least, why we were seeing that is just the advent or the implementation of high efficiency fixtures, low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, low flow everything in homes. I think there's also just more of a, although there definitely could be more of this, I think there's just more of an understanding in the general public now of, it's good to conserve water, and also as rates continue to go up, there's very much an economic incentive for them to conserve, to reduce their bills, and then with all those mounting pressures and the need for rate increases due to the costs increasing, your revenue base declining, there's been a lot of public and political pushback. Now, some of this is just due to, I think, a general sentiment of a lack of trust in the government, and and people just not thinking that the government in general is doing the right thing, and that is kind of transferred or translated into the utility sector as well. And then, from a political side of things, I go to rate hearings all the time at board meetings, commissioner, city councils, select boards, and present the need for rate increases and the support behind that. One of the ideas that DES had along with us was to, one of these webinar series to talk about, kind of getting to yes. How do we get support in the community from governing boards, from the public, to be able to implement the rate increases that our financial plan says, or maybe our rate studies say. But a lot of times politics just plays too much into this. I've seen political grandstanding from politicians, and for any politicians on the call now, I'm not knocking you. I know you have a tough job to play, but there is just a desire to, I think, artificially keep water and wastewater rates low, rightfully so, with the goal of trying to mitigate impacts on residents and customers. However, it's doing a disservice to the utility by not giving them the money they need to be able to just keep up with operations, and certainly not enough to renew and replace their infrastructure over time, such that things aren't crumbling or falling apart or getting into a position where you have reliability or quality issues. And I think that's why we see a lot of times communities go 10 years or so without a rate increase. And what that does is typically, we'll get into this a little later in the presentation. There might have been an adequate amount of reserves sitting in a bank account somewhere that they could rely upon, but those dry up very quickly without rate increases as those costs continue to increase, and per capita consumption continues to decline. So a lot I know you all are dealing with. I'm sensitive to that. I'm seeing it on a daily basis, and hopefully over the course of the next few webinars, this one really first starting on financial planning and just outlining that financial plan. Second one, we were thinking maybe more around rate design and miscellaneous fees, trying to alternative revenue sources to try to mitigate the need for rate increases on customers and help from that political standpoint. And then again, how to convey this to decision makers in the public to try to move forward. So hopefully over the course of these webinars, and obviously we want to hear feedback from you all in terms of what you're dealing with and what you'd like to see in terms of information presented, what could be helpful. Hopefully over the course of these webinars, we can give you some tips and tricks to be able to be successful and have a sustainable financial and in turn operational future for your utilities. Sarah already teased this. I don't have the clean water side, but she teased this about $2.5 billion over the next 20 years in terms of water infrastructure needs. In New Hampshire, you can see it broken down by investment category. The biggest portion of that $2.5 billion is about $1.5 million on transmission distribution, another $500 million or so on treatment, and you can see storage and source supply, and then other in there as well. And as Sarah mentioned, this is from 2022, I believe, from the EPA's Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment and their 7th report to Congress. As that is updated, I would imagine we're going to continue to see these numbers increase. So this problem is not going to go away anytime soon, and something that we need to just recognize and address head on. We're not talking too much about rate structures themselves today, more of just the financial plan and getting to a place where you understand what your revenue needs are on an annual basis, such that at a baseline, you can just have an across-the-board rate increase of your existing rate structure itself. Again, with a forthcoming webinar, getting more into the details of talking about things like fixed charges, volumetric charges, fire protection, connection fees, things like that, to how do you structure your revenue stream to meet the needs of your community, both from a financial perspective as well as those other pricing objectives. But I just wanted a couple slides here on rates themselves. Across the country, water and wastewater rates, or water and sewer rates, have increased at more than twice the rate of inflation over the last 20 years. And you can see this in 20-year, 10-year, and 5-year increments. I think one of the reasons we saw that 5-year increment tip a little bit below of what we saw over the 10 and 20 years is probably due to COVID. I just working with a lot of communities, there was a desire to try to mitigate the increases as much as possible during those periods, just to provide relief to residents. And I would imagine, there's actually, we're seeing it. I'm seeing it anecdotally, just working with several communities around New England. It's not uncommon to have high single digits or even low double digit increases for several years over the next 5 years. I think playing a little bit of catch up there. But again, this is not a new problem, and it's not one that I think is going to go away anytime soon. A little bit more on bills. I just wanted to maybe set the stage and put this into a little perspective for you. I know this information is going to be out there for you all to come back to this if you want to after this webinar. But kind of four categories here. The top tranche of this slide, a water bill at 5,000 gallons. This is a monthly bill. At the median monthly water bill, this is across the country. This is a nationwide survey at 5,000 gallons per month is approximately $34, with that 75th percentile being right at about $46. And the 25th percentile being about $26. If we go to the second box there, this is just a fixed charge. So for those communities that have a fixed charge on the water side, and there's a lot of good reasons why you would, for revenue stability purposes, it aligns well with cost of service. And again, we'll talk about that at a subsequent webinar when we get into more rate design issues. But I get asked a lot, like, what is the right level of a fixed charge? Because it is a balancing act. It's great for revenue stability purposes. However, it typically disproportionately impacts low volume customers, which a lot of communities are very sensitive to. It's always, hopefully this doesn't offend anybody on the call. I've never actually met this person, but it's always presented to me as the little old lady on a fixed income. We need to take care of this person. And that fixed charge, the more the fixed charge goes up disproportionately to the volumetric charge, it has a negative economic impact on that customer. So very sensitive there, but right at the median, about $14 per month for a fixed charge. Again, these are great from the perspective of they don't decline as your consumption fluctuates. If you have a cool, wet spring, summer, fall, and consumption declines accordingly, the amount of revenue that you have coming from any fixed component is obviously not going to fluctuate, and you're going to maintain that revenue. So it gives you a little bit more revenue stability, a little bit more flexibility in your financial plan. And then you can see that I'm not going to go through each number here just to keep it moving, but the sewer bill across the country at about $43 compared to the water bill at about $34, and that sewer fixed charge $16 compared to about $14. So we typically see sewer rates and bills be about 1.5 times that of water across the country. Typically, obviously there are anomalies there and exceptions to the rule, but that is typically what we see. So I want to quickly, before we get into some details, go over financial planning overview. So what is financial planning? I'm going to pause to take a sip of coffee here. Financial planning at a high level is just planning for the future with the best information we have today. Nobody could predict the future with certainty, certainly with regard to new regulations or things that are popping up, or predicting another pandemic or how customer usage is going to be. But we want to be able to plan for it with the best information we have. Outline a financial plan. Financial plans are typically 5 to 10 years. The reason for that being, I've worked with communities that I worked with one that had a 50-year financial plan, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous, but they asked me to do it, so I did it. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen 50 years from now. We have a hard time predicting what's going to happen 10 years from now. So that 5 to 10 year window is pretty standard. What we're trying to get away from, and why we're promoting, and why I like to promote financial planning, is just looking at the upcoming year in a silo. A lot of communities, when I start working with them for the first time, will say, they just look at their upcoming budget and they set rates accordingly. They're not thinking about what's coming in years 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 through 10 of a forecast. Doing that has a lot of benefits. So this establishes a more proactive rather than a reactive approach to rate setting by knowing what's coming. Or having an idea of what's coming. You could start planning for it today. You can think of an idea of having a significant capital improvement coming in year 5 or year 10, maybe an upgrade to a wastewater treatment facility or a water treatment facility. Understanding how much that's going to cost, how you might pay for that is going to, starting to plan for that today will allow you to be a little bit more financially flexible in your plan. Maybe start building up some reserve funds to offset a significant capital improvement, or at least have an idea it's coming. and allow you to be, a little bit more financially flexible, especially with regard to, capital improvements that you weren't planning for that are popping up, or maybe a down year in terms of consumption. By establishing a well laid out financial plan, having your financial targets and policies in place. And again, we'll get into all this as we step through the presentation or the rest of this program. It allows you to be a little bit more financially flexible, and perhaps have some money set aside to be able to offset any fluctuations, certainly in a negative way, a down year in revenue or new capital improvement. So you're not sitting there wondering, how the heck are we going to pay for this thing, or how are we going to make up for this deficit, or we're running into running into the red here. It allows just, again, a little bit more flexibility. Having planned and programmatic increases also improves the utility's cash flow. So again, trying to avoid that situation where you have no rate increases for a 10-year period, and then all of a sudden it gets to the point where you've run right up to the cliff and you need a meaningful, significant increase that allows for not great cash flow over that 10-year period for the utility, where having more revenue coming in on an annual basis, even if it's a smaller tranche. I always say I'd rather a community, if you need a 15% rate increase in year 5, I'd rather you have 3% rate increases annually than wait until that 5th year and have a 15% rate increase. I know that's not perfect math, there's some compounding there, but you get the point. Smaller magnitude, more programmatic increases just help with that cash flow, getting additional revenues annually, keeping up with inflation. I think it also helps your ratepayers and your customers as well by mitigating that rate shock. They also get a little conditioned to, every other household expenditure they have is going up typically on an annual basis. It's reasonable to expect, as water and sewer, water and wastewater costs are increasing for the utility, that the rates would increase accordingly and bills would increase accordingly on an annual basis, alleviating or mitigating the risk of that not having a rate increase for 10 years and then a meaningful double-digit rate increase. That's typically when we see rate shock for customers. It really puts a strain on being able to pay those bills, or whether it's an actual strain from an affordability perspective, or just the perception of a meaningful increase after no increases for a significant period of time. By having more programmatic a more programmatic approach to rate setting, and having more manageable, smaller increases annually can mitigate that risk for rate shock. And also, just having a well laid out financial plan can really help you communicate to your decision makers, whether that's board or water and sewer commissioners, whether that's a city council or select board, whoever's making the decision of whether or not you get a rate increase. Having a well laid out financial plan can help you communicate to those decision makers what it is you're dealing with, what costs you. Nobody's getting rich in this business, especially the municipalities or government-owned agencies. Typically very much shoestring budgets and just trying to get by communicating to not only the decision makers, but also the public as well, of what it is you're dealing with, why, the reason why you're doing what you're doing. You're not doing anything willy-nilly. You're typically doing everything for public health concerns and reliability and quality, and trying to maintain the infrastructure and the operational integrity of your utilities. By having this financial plan, it kind of shows what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that you're being very, very much forthright and programmatic and laying all this out, and you're doing it for the right reasons, and this is what the plan is. Financial planning elements at its core. I know this is a very confusing slide. I'm going to dumb it down here a bit. Really what we're trying to do is just put together what are your existing costs today? How do we think those costs are going to change over time? The biggest driver there typically is your capital improvements plan, or the renew and replacement, or just new capital improvements that need to be undertaken again over that 5 to 10 year planning horizon, and how you're going to pay for them. Again, what the timing is and the magnitude and the dollar amount. But you also want to think about things like operating expenses, your existing debt service obligations, and we'll get into this in more detail. And then comparing that against what are your existing revenues today? So if you had no additional rate increases over the planning horizon, and you might even have some reductions in revenue because of reductions in per capita consumption or just declines in consumption over an annual basis or a year-to-year basis. What are your revenues going to look like without additional rate increases? And how does that compare to the amount of revenue you need or your revenue requirement, all your costs, taking into consideration the operating expenses, debt service obligations, the financing or the funding of your capital improvements plan? One of the other elements here that we like to factor into a financial plan is more of financial or fiscal policies, financial health of the utilities. So thinking of things like cash reserves, right? I'll get into this more later, but everybody on this call would love to have a rainy day fund or a bank account sitting there for things that pop up. I know I wish mine was a little bit bigger. However, it's a good idea to have one if you can. It's the same logic for water and sewer utilities as they continue to step through their financial plan. As things pop up that we weren't planning for, again, having that rainy day fund, just showing that financial health. So we use that as kind of a balancing act to some degree with the financial plan. And again, I'll get into that a little later. But all that really does is outline for us what is our annual revenue requirement and how much do revenues need to increase annually to be able to support that revenue requirement and support that financial health. So I'll go through the financial planning process here in a bit more detail. Starts with, in my opinion, establishing the right team, bringing the right people to the table early on in the process, and then getting into identifying what the data needs are, also in establishing the team, establishing what the goals are for the project, making sure that everybody's on the same page. We're moving lockstep to the greatest degree possible. I know there's going to be differences of opinion, but just making sure everybody has an idea of what the overarching goals are. There might be differences of opinion once we get to some sort of results of how to actually implement or the right thing to implement. However, at least a trajectory or a directional goal of where we're trying to get to and what our ultimate goal is. And then pulling all the data together. This can be data intensive in terms of mostly on the revenue side of getting raw billing data. However, there are alternatives to that. There's a more simplistic approach that I'll get into. But identifying what the data needs are for the project and then going to gather all that, who needs to be responsible. Then preparing the financial plan. So once you get all the data together, how do we put the financial plan together? Again, this is not rocket science by any means. A lot of information goes into it. Obviously, we want a lot of information in there, and we want to plan for the future with the best information we have today and our best estimates of what's going to happen. But outlining, and it can be a very simple financial plan of just showing what your revenue requirements are compared to your existing revenues, and then maybe taking some financial health into consideration. And then it's always good to pressure test some assumptions and analyze what those impacts are of, what if a capital improvements pop up that we weren't planning for? What if this capital improvement costs more than we thought it was, or is delayed or actually moved forward in the years, or consumption declines more than we thought? How much of an impact does that make? And then ultimately communicating the results and determine a plan for financial planning updates. So communicate to ratepayers what it is you're doing, why, when, how it's going to impact them. Have that same communication to the government or the governing entities that are ultimately going to be approving the rate increases. Again, not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. You have clear-cut information that you worked really hard for to establish a plan. Be forthright about what that plan is, why you're proposing to do what you're doing, and then have a plan for updates. I always say financial plans are living, breathing documents. They're not set in stone. Things are going to change, and in the utility industry, sometimes very rapidly and over short periods of time. Financial plans should be updated and just make sure that the changes that we've seen are not deviating us from our plan too significantly. So who should be involved? So I said it before, kind of bringing the right team to the table. utility directors or DPW directors or water and sewer superintendents, the person that's going to really drive this thing forward, finance, accounting, billing staff. So, a lot of the information that we're going to require is going to come from finance and accounting. So operating budgets, historical actuals, upcoming budgets, the billing staff who might be able to get us, and I should have put on here too, sometimes IT as well, going to get us some raw billing data if we're going to a more dynamic or more detailed approach to revenue. And I'll talk about that compared to the simplistic approach soon here. Operations and engineering. So more of what are the changes going to be over time in our operating expenses, those capital improvements that we need to undertake. What are the changes? What do we need to factor into our financial plan? They're usually the folks on the ground. Sometimes communities bring in their external engineering consultants to, if they're going through an asset management process or they know their system very well and the capital improvements they need to undertake and the prioritization of those capital improvements. This is all relevant information that needs to be factored into the financial plan and the capital improvements module that goes into it. So having those people at the table is great as well. Sometimes bringing in customer service staff, just to understand what are you hearing today from customers if they're calling with complaints about their bills or their rates in general. Having an understanding that might influence what you're doing from the outset. A lot of this is going to have come down to more rate design, so structuring rates and maybe having customer class-based rates or adjusting fixed versus volumetric rates. That's more where that's going to come in rather than the financial planning. So we'll touch on that on a subsequent webinar. But bringing those customer service staff to the table early to understand what the concerns are, and then also having them there at the tail end. So they know the full scope of what you've done, why you're proposing what you're proposing. So hopefully when those rates are implemented, and inevitably there probably will be calls asking about increases in rates or changes in rates, those customer service staff are already educated on the process, why things are being implemented the way that they are, so that they can respond accordingly to customers. And then sometimes, this has blown up in my face before, but it's also worked in our favor. Sometimes representatives, a representative or representatives from the governing body. So let's say it's a city council, maybe a member from the finance committee or something like that. Bring them into the fold. It usually gives them a deeper perspective into what you're dealing with than they're going to be able to receive at a city council meeting or something like that, or bring in one of the water and sewer commissioners and have them kind of step through the process with you, so they're fully engaged, they're fully understanding everything that you're going through and why. It typically leads to that individual being an advocate for you at the tail end when rates are ultimately being approved or not approved. Again, gathering those necessary data, we're looking for historical and current operating budgets, both on the expense side and the revenue side, annual financial statements historically, and we typically look at a 3 to 5 year look back over years, because we want to tease out any anomalies, any anomalous year maybe with regard to consumption. So you had a very high consumption year compared to historical, very low consumption year, or a one-time expense that is not common. We want to be able to tease those things out and have a more normalized year to base our financial plan off of. Again, so those annual financial statements going back, how much revenue did you actually bring in the door? What were your actual expenses? Obviously, an audited financial statement is preferred, but I know not every community has audited financial statements. So unaudited is fine, well, as long as it's something that we can base a historical view off of. Existing debt service obligations. So if you have any debt on the books today, what are those principal and interest payments for each issuance over time, to make sure we factor those in and they're being adequately paid for? Any wholesale or other contractual obligation you might have and the costs associated with that, or potentially even the revenue if you're a wholesale provider. fund balance information. If you have a retained earnings or a capital reserve account, how much money are in those accounts today? What is the flow of funds? How does money move in and out of each of those funds? Setting some sort of financial policies accordingly. You might have financial policies already, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in a little bit, but not every community, and actually more often than not, when I work with communities, they don't have financial policies established for their enterprise funds or their utility funds, mostly on the general fund side. And if you don't have financial policies, maybe consider establishing them, and I'll talk about why that's helpful. We also want to bring in historical rates and charges. We want to know how rates have changed over time or not changed over time. Your miscellaneous fees, we want to understand that, and also it's helpful if we take the more detailed approach to revenue setting. We're going to need those rates to be able to base our revenue calculations off of, and then potentially detailed billing data. This is going to be every bill produced over a 3 to 5 year period. This is more relevant if we're doing more detailed rate design, where we might look at maybe implementing an inclining block rate structure or tiered rates. We want to know how consumption is fitting within each of those tiers. It also can be very helpful, though, from the perspective of outlining a financial plan and just having a more robust revenue projection. I'll talk about why that's important, but it's not necessary. So if this is a very data intensive process for you, or you don't have the bandwidth to get the data, or your data aren't clean, that's a common, maybe taking a more simplistic approach just to get that financial plan outlined, and then potentially as data are cleaned up over time, you might be able to adjust that accordingly. But some sort of billing data to understand the number of accounts that you have, the gallons of water or 100 cubic feet of water being consumed, so you can outline that financial plan and that revenue projection accordingly. And then again, one of the biggest drivers of financial plan is the funding of the capital improvements plan. So any known source of funding associated with that and the timing. So let's first talk about operating expenses. Utilize historical and current budgets to forecast the operating expenses. I have outlined financial plans where we just have a single line item that says operating expenses. However, it's my preference, and I think it's better for forecasting purposes to have more detailed budgets. This is the picture down below is just a snapshot of a very long operating budget with I think about 100 line items. But if we have a detailed budget with individual line items, it allows us to potentially escalate those line items differently at various inflation rates. Some might not be going up at all. Some might be seeing a 3% increase. Some, like electricity or benefits or something like that, might be going up at a higher percentage increase. It allows us to be a little bit more granular with our forecasting of operating expenses. But at the end of the day, again, if we wanted to take a more simplistic approach, just having a single line item that says these are your operating expenses, making sure to tease out any debt service that might be included in there if you're going to factor that in separately, and just having some reasonable increases over time. And then in terms of, in addition to potentially having just across the board increases or inflationary type increases to existing operating expenses, if you want to take into consideration how your operating expenses might change with potentially upcoming capital improvements. So, I work with communities a lot where they're getting a new water treatment facility and their operating expenses are going to change accordingly. They might need to add a full-time employee, or their electricity costs might change, or their chemical related costs might change. There might be an actual complete overhaul, not an overhaul, but a meaningful change to the structure of the operating expenses, to where just doing across the board increases off of historical or budgeted information is not very relevant for some components, given a change to your actual operations. So we want to be able to factor that in as well. Again, planning with the best information and then updating once maybe a new treatment facility in that example comes online and you see what the actual expenses are, and you can factor that in. Your Principal and interest payments on any existing debt service. Again, just get your, if you do have debt service, every issuance that you have outstanding, what are the annual principal and interest payments, so you can have that factored in, and you're ensuring that the revenue that you're generating is covering not only your operating expenses, but also your debt service obligations, your existing debt service obligations annually. I like to, and again, a more simplistic approach could just be a total line, single line item that says debt service. And you have the principal and interest payments in total and just the outline of that. I typically like to see it broken out like you see on the right side of the screen here by actual issuance. What this allows us to do is, through the financial planning process, be a little bit more robust, as you can see maybe individual issuance dropping off. When are they, you get to the tail end of a 10, 20, 30 year loan cycle, when are those projects dropping off, or that debt service dropping off, that maybe we could supplement it with a new debt service issuance to pay for a capital project. Just again, gives us a little bit more detail, so we can talk a little bit more intently about how the costs are going to change over time and why, if you can speak to that. But again, not necessary. So again, if I want to make this clear, financial plans can be as detailed as you want them to be, or they can be fairly simple, where, to this point, we'd have two single line items: operating expenses and existing debt service. And then we will add on to that, identifying future capital improvements. So, what do you need? A lot of communities, and I know New Hampshire is doing a fantastic job of promoting asset management and having communities actually understand the condition of their assets and their infrastructure in the ground. How old are they? What's the condition? Where are the assets? What are the priority projects that need to be undertaken over time? Having a more programmatic approach to not only financial plan, but reinvesting in your system can really help of limiting surprises or emergency repairs, which can be incredibly expensive. Trying to avoid putting yourself in an operational or compliance related issue. Taking less of a band-aid approach and more of a programmatic, aggressive approach to actually looking at your system and reinvesting in it the way that it needs to, probably looking at priorities, just in annual expenditures, and keeping up with the depreciation or the aging of those assets. This can mitigate rate increases to customers. Now, in the short term, if you were to kick the can down the road for the next 10 years and just let the infrastructure crumble, you might not need rate increases to be able to support that. Maybe small rate increases for inflation, but if you're not reinvesting in the system, you're not going to need as much rate increases, or many rate increases. But when you get to the point where you absolutely have to have additional revenue to do the capital improvements because you've taken that Band-Aid approach, infrastructure has crumbled, you put yourself into a reliability or quality related issue, and you need to do something about it immediately, those capital costs are only going to get more expensive over time. And they're probably going to be more expensive at that point, rather than if they were just kind of renew and replacement type investments annually. So there might be more rate increases in the short term, but in the long term, it's probably going to save your ratepayers money and save the utility money as well. And again, I mentioned the asset management process. It can help you determine the priority initiatives or the priority projects. What is most susceptible to failure? What should we undertake immediately? What can be delayed some? So understanding what the timing, cost, and ultimately what the funding is of these capital improvements. So the funding of the CIP. So once you have the capital improvement plan laid out, you know the timing of each project you need to undertake, what year it's going to be undertaken in, what the cost associated with that project is, again, with the best information we have today, probably escalating those costs into future dollars. Most capital improvements plan are presented in a singular year of dollars, maybe the current year that they were developed. And so being able to forecast those and escalate them into future dollars, just to make, again, be a little conservative and make sure that once you get to that point, especially high dollar amount projects, They could be 3 to 5% increases annually from a capital perspective, from a inflationary perspective. We want to take that into consideration. But once we have that laid out of the timing and the magnitude of each project of the capital improvements plan, the question becomes, how are you going to pay for those projects? Now, there's typically, two core components, I'd say, more of cash funded. This is also referred to, you'll see it as PAYGO or pay as you go. This is money just generated out of rates annually to pay for projects, either in their entirety or maybe a portion of them. So it's cash funded capital. It's part of your budget. You're generating revenue from rates to be able to pay for projects. A lot of times PAYGO is for, routine renewal and replacement or maintenance, smaller ticket items, but there can be cash utilized to offset some large ticket items as well, especially if you're putting monies aside. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there's debt finance. So issuing new debt to pay for capital improvements. This is typically, although there are some communities that take out debt for smaller ticket items, lower magnitude dollars. But this is typically reserved for projects with infrastructure which have, long useful lives and have a high dollar amount associated with them. An asset that has a useful life of 20, 30, 50 years, it's reasonable to expect that you can just amortize the costs associated with that over time, reduce the impact to customers in the short term, and put some of that on the backs of the future ratepayers who are going to be benefiting from that asset. Yes, you'll probably pay a little bit of money in inflation, but with low interest rates and with the drinking water SRF and other SRF programs, with the inflation that we've been seeing, it's probably still a really good deal over time. And I'd say, don't be afraid to use debt. I work with some communities sometimes, and they're vehemently against issuing any debt. They think it's just overburdening or over leveraging the utility and just delaying the inevitable. I'm not afraid of debt. I think debt is great, again, for those reasons of amortizing a large ticket investment that's going to have a long useful life. And paying for it over time to mitigate the increase to customers in the short term, as long as that debt is managed well. And that is, you have enough revenue to cover all your operating expenses and your debt service in some of a surplus. Or you have a significant reserve fund or a meaningful reserve fund sitting there. You're managing the debt well. You're never getting into positions where you can't cover your debt service payments. As long as that debt is managed well and is not 75% of your overall revenue requirements or your overall budget, I think issuing debt, especially for those large ticket items, is totally fine. And then, utilizing grants. We're seeing more grants than we have in decades as of recently. Outside funds coming in. Any dollar amount that you can get from a grant or low interest loan is going to immediately offset the need for additional rate increases for customers. So to take advantage of those grants while you can and use them to supplement your capital improvement plan. And then something I'll reserve until a subsequent webinar, but looking at other fees to be able to pay for capital improvements, things like impact fees or future capital improvements, connection fees, things like that can help, typically not in a meaningful way, especially if there's not a lot of growth in the community. But again, every dollar amount helps. So I'll talk a little bit about the approach to forecasting revenue. So at this point, we have your cost side of things laid out, your operating expenses, your existing debt service obligations, the financing your capital improvement plan. How are you paying for those projects, either cash funded or we're issuing new debt and we have a new set of principal and interest payments accordingly. So we know how much revenue needs to get generated annually. We also then want to forecast what your revenues are under your existing rates today to see how much of a gap there is and how much your revenue needs to come up by to be able to support that. So First, I'll refer to that simple approach. This is just establishing a representative test year based on historical actuals. You're not building up your revenue, which I'll talk about in the detailed. It's just typically maybe a few line items that just have your revenues there. We'd like to separate the user charges from any miscellaneous revenues. So when we talk about a rate increase, you need a 5% rate increase. That is typically only applying to your user charges. Not your miscellaneous revenues. Those might go up or remain flat. So it might just be a few line items here that you can then just forecast over time at the existing levels and see how that compares to your cost structure. The pros of this simple approach is it's very easy to accomplish. You can just look at historical actuals, maybe normalize that for a reasonable year, not a boom year, not a bust year, something in the middle. The cons is it doesn't allow for much robust sensitivity analysis around the changes in potentially the number of customers you have or the usage. And that's where the detailed approach to forecasting revenue comes in. This is where you actually build up your revenues using your existing rates and billing determinants. This is usually your number of accounts, maybe potentially by meter size, if you have a fixed charge by meter size, and then your consumption. So either the total amount of KGALs or CCF, and you're actually taking your existing rates, multiplying it by the billing determinants, the accounts and consumption you had in a given period of time, and calculating revenue. Now, if you do this, you want to make sure that you're taking that calculated revenue and comparing it against an actual test year or an actual year of revenue from those financial statements to make sure that the revenue that you're calculating is reasonably close, within a few percentages of what you actually brought in the door. A lot of times there can be some funky things going on in billing system where adjustments are made and you actually take the rates and multiply them by your billing determinants and the revenue comes out nowhere close. We want to pressure test that and make sure that the revenue that we're calculating, if we take this detailed approach, is reasonable in terms of what we can expect to actually bring in the door in terms of revenue. Now, this will allow us to do a little bit more robust sensitivity analysis going forward. Potentially, if you've been seeing reductions in consumption annually, looking historically at 1 to 3% or something, we might be a little conservative and assume that consumption is going to continue to decline annually over a 5-year period of our financial plan. Or if you're going to have some growth in the system, we might maybe not bank on it, but at least see what that potentially can mean in terms of changes in revenues by increasing the customer count and increasing the consumption accordingly. The cons of this, obviously, it's more complicated, it's time, it's data intensive. It's just, it complicates the entirety of the model. This is where I think the most complicated aspect of potentially a financial plan is getting clean, reliable billing data and having the ability to look at that over time. If you are able to go get those historical billing data, which is great, it's nice to be able to, again, measure that volatility. Look historically, how volatile is your consumption from year to year? Do you see huge, sharp fluctuations from year to year, maybe weather dependent or something like that? If the answer is yes, you might want to take that into consideration in terms of maybe having more reserve funds sitting there to be able to offset those bust years. We might want to do something in rate design by having higher fixed charges coming in to be more stable and predictable. If you don't see a lot of volatility from year to year, consumption's pretty stable, you might not need to be as aggressive in terms of establishing reserve funds or having more fixed related charges for that revenue stability purpose if your consumption's pretty stable. But having those historical billing data, if you are able to get them out of your system and run some sensitivity analyses in the future, and also just look historically at how consumption has been changing over time from year to year, maybe even potentially seasonally, it just gives you more information to, again, what we're trying to do is have the most reasonable financial plan possible going forward. Again, nobody can predict the future with certainty, but having maybe a reasonable and slightly conservative approach to where your revenue might be going, so that you can then compare that against the revenue requirements or the costs that you've outlined. Let me see where I am on time. Yeah, I think I've touched on this. One point on here that I did not touch on. I just want to keep moving. When you are building up your revenue, whether it's the simple approach or the more detailed approach, make sure to include all your miscellaneous revenue. So we're not just looking at your user charges, like your main rate structure. We want to look at things like connection fees, turn on, turn off fees, late fees, maybe some investment revenue. Have those revenues built into the forecast as well. Don't be overly liberal in that and think they're going to go up significantly, or take the best year that you had. Again, take a more reasonable, conservative approach to having those revenues in there. But we want them to offset what the revenue need is, so that you're not generating additional revenue from your ratepayers that we know is going to be coming in the door from these miscellaneous revenue sources. So I'll talk a little bit about financial policies. Again, this is more of the financial health. The typical one in New England for especially smaller and even mid-sized communities, what they're looking at is just establishing a minimum reserve fund balance. This is typically measured in days cash on hand of either total O&M expenses, operation maintenance expenses, or total revenue. For example, a target of 365 days cash on hand of O&M expenses would be equivalent to a full year of all your O&M expenses just sitting in a reserve fund. That is, if your revenue dried up for a full year, you'd at least be able to pay your operating expenses. This allows for greater financial flexibility by having a rainy day fund. It can help with rate smoothing, rate mitigation purposes. It can help with paying for capital improvements that pop up that you weren't planning for. Again, allowing you to not have to deviate from your financial plan too significantly if the actual results don't align with what our projections are. I get asked a lot the question of what is the right level of a reserve fund balance, and unfortunately there's no answer to that. I think it's community by community dependent. What is your risk profile? How volatile is your consumption on a year-to-year basis, or your revenue on a year-to-year basis? How significant of a capital improvements plan are you facing in the future? How much do you have a very large non-residential customer that if they were to pack up shop and leave town, you'd be in a world of hurt in terms of the revenue loss associated with that. All these things are establishing your risk profile and might establish what the minimum or maximum threshold is for a reserve fund balance. Typically, the minimum that we typically see is about 90 days of O&M. That's typically the bare minimum. If we look at the Northeast as a whole, I think it's about 456 days of O&M. That's typically more than is necessary for most communities in New Hampshire and New England as a whole. A lot of those northeastern communities that were surveyed in there are larger communities that are issuing revenue bonds on a regular basis and trying to get better ratings for lower interest rates. Again, establishing what your risk profile is, how volatile are your revenues, how potentially volatile would your revenues be over time, how significant of a capital improvements plan are you facing. But the important thing is having something in a reserve fund to be able to, again, just have that rainy day, that what if, that safeguard. And then something that most communities in New England don't look at is having a debt service coverage ratio. This is just how much revenue is left over for paying your debt service obligations once operating expenses are fully covered. So, for example, if you have revenue of $2 million, operation and maintenance expenses of $1.5 million, and debt service of $250,000, your debt service coverage would be 2 times. Most requirements are, if there's requirements in like a bond covenant or something like that for those that are issued revenue bonds, it's debt service coverage of 1.25 times. So, I would imagine most communities on this call right now, this is not something that you absolutely have to look at. It's not a requirement, but it is something that might want to be tracked over time for financial health purposes. If if your financial policies are already in place, just ensure they are met through the financial planning process. If you don't have financial policies, consider establishing them and getting them approved by the governing board or the governing party that is ultimately approving your rates. Now, this could help by just providing a backstop for you of saying, hey, we've established our financial plan and we're meeting all of the financial policies that you approved. Meeting the reserve fund balance, meeting debt service coverage, if that's part of that. It gives you a little bit of safeguard or a backstop to be able to justify what you're doing, especially if, like in the case of the chart on the right here, what this community was doing is they were increasing their revenues more on an annual basis than they needed just to cover their costs to build their reserve fund balance up by the year 2030 up to that targeted amount. They set financial policies and they said, we want to get there eventually. We're not going to get there in all one fell swoop because of the rate increases that would be necessary in 1 year, but we're going to get there over a 5-year period and start building that up. And by having those financial policies, it can just help you justify what it is you're asking for. And then determine your annual revenue needs. So once we have the financial plan established, we have your cost side of things, how much revenue needs to get generated annually, which might include some additional revenue for reserve fund purposes. Then we have what are your existing, the revenue forecast under existing rates today. How much additional revenue do you need? A very simple chart like this can be put together where the columns or the bars on an annual basis are your revenue requirements or your costs, your operating expenses, cash funded capital, existing debt service, any proposed debt service, and the line going across is your revenue. So what you can see is this community, without any additional rate increases from 2026 to 2030, is generating a deficit every single year and will require rate increases to be able to support that. I'll talk just a few examples. Utility example 1, currently operating in a deficit, so its revenues are not meeting its costs on an annual expenses. They have limited to no reserve funds, so there's nothing that they can rely upon for any longer. In this case, additional revenue is needed immediately to bring those revenues up to the expenses. With the annual rate increases equaling at a minimum the across-the-board percentage increase to meet what that revenue sufficiency is, so bringing the revenue up to your costs. The reason why I say at a minimum is because you might want to do something in this position here, where if let's say in 2025, that reserve fund balance was at 0 rather than about $2 million, the community might say, hey, we never want to be put in this position again. So we're not only going to raise our revenues to be able to meet our costs, we're going to raise them a little bit more to start building up our reserve fund over time. And so that's why I say at a minimum, in addition to financial sufficiency purposes. Example number 2, utility is currently operating in a deficit. So again, its revenues are not meeting its costs on an annual basis. But the reserve fund balance doubles that of its annual target. So it's well above what the policy that was set in place, more reserves than are necessary. So although to reach financial sufficiency, to have revenues meeting expenses, additional revenue is required immediately, what this community might be able to do is is to kind of phase in their rate increases over time and allow their reserve fund balance to reduce annually down to that target amount. This allows for smaller increases to build up over time, mitigate rate shock on customers, and utilize some of those reserve funds that have been built up to bring the reserve fund balance down to its target level and allow you, maybe a 3 to 5 year window of raising the revenues up to where they need to be for financial sufficiency, where revenue is meeting your overall expenses. And again, at the same time, mitigating the short-term impacts. You want to take care in this instance to ensure that revenue will match expenses within a reasonable time frame, and it won't just keep that reserve fund balance isn't going to continue to precipitously drop to where you're in the position of this utility example where there's no reserve funds and then all of a sudden you need additional revenue above and beyond. And then utility example 3, this utility is currently operating in a slight surplus. Reserve fund balance are at target levels, so no additional revenues are needed, maybe outside of some slight inflationary annual basis. but this utility knows that it must replace its water treatment facility in 10 years, costing several times its annual operating budget. So this community might want to think about and avoiding of running right up to that cliff in 10 years when that water treatment facility needs to be undertaken and a significant investment accordingly. The utility begins setting rate increases that are slightly higher than needed for financial sufficiency purposes and putting those additionals away in a capital reserve to be able to offset that project once it comes in year 10. So, maybe you don't have to issue debt for the entirety of the project. You can offset a meaningful portion of it out of cash that has been built up over time. Again, trying to mitigate the impact on customers to the greatest degree possible. And again, I talked about this a little bit before, but once that financial plan is set and you have what your annual rate increases are, it might be good to just to pressure test this a bit. So on the revenue side, if you've been seeing 3% reductions in consumption annually, what happens if you see a year of 6%? How much does that really impact your financial plan? How much does that impact your fund balance and your revenue accordingly? Again, I brought up the example of having a very large non-residential customer that makes up a significant portion of your revenue stream. What if they go out of business or they leave town? How is that impacting your financial plan? On the expense side, what if your increases are more than necessary? By establishing this plan in Excel and just having some toggles, you're able to fairly easily just change a 3% to a 6% reduction and see how that impacts the revenues and see how that impacts your reserve fund balance and potentially even your customer impacts. There's difference in opinion in this world, but I like to err on the slightly conservative side when I'm outlining a financial plan. Obviously, you don't want to be overly conservative and have rate increases that are unnecessary and put undue pressure on ratepayers and customers. However, given the uncertainty associated with the future, I'd rather, if we are going to be wrong, I'd rather be wrong with a small margin on the right side of things to where you have a slightly more revenue that you need. And then the financial plan can always be adjusted accordingly moving forward once we understand how the new trajectory of costs and revenues are coming in the door. So some just key outputs for consideration. Once that financial plan is actually established and ready to be shared with the public, both governing boards or government agencies and the customers as well. Just some high-level charts, some that I've been showing throughout this presentation can go a long way in helping communicate the utility needs. Cash flow charts, again, show the revenue requirements of the costs on those bars compared to the revenue under existing rates. Fund balance charts show, maybe fund balance is going negative over a period of time without additional rate increases. It just clearly visualizes for anybody paying attention or looking, rather than looking at detailed numbers, I can just look at a picture and see, oh, if we don't have rate increases, our fund balance is going negative. That actually can't happen. I wish it could. That'd be fantastic. But it can't. It's an unsustainable financial future. So again, just trying to do our best, and we'll get in more of this when we get into the webinar, where we're focusing more on getting to yes, or getting approval, or getting buy-in, getting the rate increases that you've worked to through the financial planning and the rate setting process calculated, getting them actually approved, so you can lead to that financial and operational sustainability. And also, looking at customer impacts and using dollar amounts along with percentages. I know everybody's always going to calculate what the percentage increase is, and that's what's going to be communicated. But sometimes a 20% rate increase sounds really scary. But when you break that down into dollars and cents of what a customer's actually paying on an annual, a quarterly, a monthly, or even a daily basis, it seems a lot more palatable in most situations. So making sure to communicate that, don't hide the percentage increase, because somebody's going to calculate it eventually, and it just seems like, from my perspective, that you're trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. But don't hide the fact of what the actual dollars and cents are. And it just, I think it resonates a lot more with folks. It certainly resonates more in my head when I'm thinking dollars rather than a percentage increase. Those dollars I can relate to, the cup of coffee that I bought this morning. Oh, the increase that I'm going to pay over the next month for my water service is less than a daily cup of coffee. That that resonates with somebody. If you tell them a percentage increase, they probably have no idea what they're paying on their bill currently, and it's really hard for that to translate into their other household expenditures. So focus on those dollars as well as the percentages. Try to break that down into easy information for folks to consider. And again, here's just a snapshot of a very typical dashboard that you all can build with the cash flow in the top left-hand corner, with the costs going from left to right in the columns, the revenue with the rate increases, that reserve fund balance over time, bill impacts on the bottom right. And you could do something as simple as you can see on the very top portion of your screen. And I know this is probably small for you, sorry, but just plugging in rate increases on an annual basis. And as those rate increases change, you'll see the charts update accordingly. So if we had zeros all across instead of 8% and 5% rate increases through 2030, you'd see that reserve fund balance go negative. You'd see the deficit being run on an annual basis. Yes, you'd see no impacts to customers, but you'd see the financial health of the utility deteriorate very quickly. And again, that could be a very telling observation and story for not only the public, but the governing boards as well that are ultimately approving your rate increases. So final thoughts, again, financial plans are living, breathing documents. They should be updated at least annually with the latest and greatest information. Given the volatility and the unpredictability, annual updates allow you to be more flexible and make adjustments as necessary and deviate from that plan as you need to, and hopefully in the smallest way possible. In my opinion, it's best to, again, I said this before, 5 years of 3% rate increases rather than just 1 year in year 5 of a 15% rate increase. It just allows for better cash flow for the utility and is smaller tranches for customers to bite off, and it can mitigate that rate shock. And then also, again, teasing another webinar series where we're looking at rate design and other alternative revenue sources. Look for every alternative revenue source that you possibly can. Miscellaneous fees, fire protection fees is a big one. A meaningful portion of the costs, at least on the water side, that utilities are incurring is associated with fire protection and could be recovered from fire protection charges. A lot of communities don't have fire protection charges, and those that do are not, they're not set to where they could be for recovering the full cost of service. And that can have a meaningful impact in reducing the need of rate increases for your customers moving forward. Again, just saving that general ratepayer money and help from a political standpoint of getting the rate increases sold. So that being said, thank you so much for your patience. I do appreciate it. I'm sorry you had to listen to my voice for an hour. I'll turn it back over to Sarah for maybe some Q&A.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. So we did have a couple questions come in the chat. I was just going to ask those to you, Dave, and we may have an answer on the DES side as well. One of the questions, I know this did come in, Dave, when you were presenting, is can participants in this webinar use the slides presented in discussions with our customers? Great to see that your data aligns with our recent history and forecasts for revenue increases. So as far as any DES information that we presented, everything we shared is public, so that can be provided. And then Dave, do you want to answer for the slides that you have?
Sure. Yeah, everything that we provided, all the slides that we just walked through are public from our perspective as well. So use them as you'd like.
Great. And if people do want a copy of the slides, I can provide those if you email me. We will provide the recording, but we were not planning to send out the slides themselves, I don't think, unless there's a huge demand. The next question I saw, I was going to address this one from the numbers that I showed, and Dave can add to it as well, but this was from Chris Albert, and he said, ASCE had the 2025 report card ranking. Overall costs for the country went from roughly $400 billion to $600 billion with inflation. And do your numbers reflect that? So I'll just point out for the numbers that I shared, which were from the Clean Watershed Needs Survey and the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment, those were not inflated numbers. So those were from the year of the survey results, which, as I stated previously, was 2022. So expect that they would be larger than that due to inflation. And Dave, did you want to add anything for the numbers that you shared? I think you had the same number as me. So
same
yeah.
exact source, so same answer there.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I see some other questions coming in. I will also point out, I think people have the option, if you do want to raise your hand and ask a verbal question, you can do that too. I see a couple of people asking for the slides, so I can get those to people. I see one question from Christina. What financial software packet are you utilizing for the slides? Dave, do you want to answer that?
Christina, I want to make sure that I'm answering your question. Are you talking about more of the...
And I see she's...
Christina, yeah.
Let's see if we can unmute her.
Are you talking, Christina, while you're being unmuted, more of some of the charts that you were seeing? For example charts?
I'm going to ask my DES colleagues. Oh,
yeah,
good. Yeah.
So the question I had is, which financial package are you using yet when you're showing these slides? Are you, like, we currently are using Waterworth for our financial projections for revenue and also for our expenditures. I was just wondering which packet or what are you guys utilizing in this presentation for showing
all of
the rates and such?
Yeah, all the charts and everything that you saw, Christina, were built in Excel. So more often than not, for our clients, we build from the ground up non-proprietary financial planning and rate models in Excel that are custom built for the utility, and it's theirs to keep forever and update as necessary. My firm also does have its own software package that does financial planning and rate setting, but did not want to tout that here. So everything that you saw was just in Excel. I wanted to make it accessible for everybody to be able to they have it on their desktop and they can go build these models or get the information they need in there. I think it's a great tool.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I do see enough people in the chat saying they want the slides. I'm going to send them to everybody. And Dave, are you okay with me sharing your slides with everyone as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. So just no more requests. I will send them to everybody who attended or everybody who registered. Let me see if we got any other questions that came in. I did see a question about whether or not this is being recorded to view a second time or by others. And yes, the answer is we are recording it. We will share that with everybody who registered. I don't see any other new questions coming in. Does anyone have a question they want to raise their hand, or any others in the chat? Please feel free to type those in. All right, I see one came in. From a funding strategy perspective, how do you balance building cash reserves with being able to show the need through raising rates and increasing a system's eligibility for a loan or grant package? Funding agencies tend to favor systems in need and disadvantaged versus a system doing a good job financially.
All right, let me just reread this one.
Yeah, it's a long one.
Jason's throwing me the curveball. I should have known. Thanks, Jason. Hope you're doing well. Just messing with you.
So I can say something from the DES perspective.
Sure.
And speaking from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, it is true, affordability does factor into our calculations, but we do, we also want to prioritize systems that are doing a good job. So I think it is a balance between doing those two things. And I certainly, don't think we'd want to see systems putting themselves at a financial disadvantage just to be more competitive for a funding package. But our ultimate goal would be that systems have the financial sustainability to be able to not need as much financial support from us. Obviously, we live in a time of limited resources, and we can only help so many systems. So I think, the ultimate goal is that you are financially sustainable on your own through your rates and being able to recover the costs that you need to be able to make those investments. So that's what I'll say about that. And I don't know, David, do you want to add anything?
I mean, from my perspective, just because you might be in a good financial position currently, especially with regard to maybe having adequate reserve fund balances, that doesn't mean that you don't have a need. That doesn't mean that you might not already be a disadvantaged community or have significant capital improvements coming up where there's a strong need that can be justified and shown. And just because you have those reserve fund balances, you've worked to get them in a good place. And I think Sarah would agree to this. We wouldn't want you to then just deplete those reserves to offset the capital improvements moving forward, and then just be right in a poor financial position again. So it's showing something good from a need perspective. I think that need is always, or more often than not, always there, even if you're starting from a strong financial position. And again, it could be a disadvantaged community, but I mean, I would never advocate for allowing your financials to diminish or deplete just to show that you have a greater need.
Well said. I see no other questions right now. I did have one question, Dave, I was going to ask you. When you were showing options on keeping that reserve balance, and you suggested maybe a year of operational expenses would be one method of, or one number you could target in a financial policy. Could that number, would you recommend that number be dynamic in that, as your operational expenses increase, that number would also increase, and so your reserve balance would go up?
Yes. So, and again, I don't think that 365, that was just an example. I'm not saying that is the target.
Right.
I think it's probably aggressive for most smaller to mid-sized communities from what you actually need to maintain, although I would not be unhappy if they did. However, yes, if you're basing that off of either operating expenses, some communities base their target off of total revenues or total revenue requirement inclusive of debt service as well. As those change over time, especially on the operating expense side, maybe just inflationary type increases, your target should increase accordingly. Should not maintain static, because if it does, then you're going in the opposite direction. Good question, sir.
I think that's everybody's question. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. Oh, there was another question. Is there anything that prohibits max through an RSA or just at a town level? So I think Christina's asking about that reserve balance. Is there anything that, I think she's asking if there's like a maximum set by an RSA, or is it just set by the town financial policies? And Dave, do you know the answer to that question for New Hampshire?
I don't know, Christina, but I will find out and I will get back to you. I think I have your email, or Sarah can get it to me.
I can get it to you. Yep.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your attendance. Again, you'll receive certificates if you requested them. You'll receive a recording as well as a copy of the slides. So thank you again to Dave for being here and presenting to us today. I think it was really informative, and we look forward to having him back at another webinar in the future. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.